Nobody warned Darren that the restricted corridor smelled like warm stone and burnt copper. He had been on Station Halcyon for 11 months. 11 months of cataloging alien biology samples, writing reports nobody read, and eating rehydrated meals alone in a lab barely big enough for 2 chairs. The diplomatic summit was 3 days away. The entire station was running on tight nerves and tighter schedules. Everyone had somewhere important to be. Darren had been sent to check a faulty thermal sensor behind panel row 7. That was it. That was his contribution to humanity's most significant first contact in recorded history. Go fix the vent reading. He found the panel, pulled out his scanner, and crouched low. That was when he saw the eye. One eye, golden, still, and watching him from the shadows behind the heating duct. It did not blink. It did not move. It simply looked at him the way very old things look at very small problems, patient and measuring. Darren did not stand up. He did not reach for his comm. Some part of his brain, older than language, told him clearly, do not move fast. He sat down on the floor instead. The corridor was cold, and the metal grating pressed hard into the back of his legs. He set his scanner down beside him. He turned slightly, not fully facing the eye, the way he used to sit near stray animals as a child back in the Nairobi district. Angled, non-threatening, present without being a demand. Silence. Then, slowly, the rest of the creature came into view. It was small, smaller than he expected. He had seen the official VLDRI files. Massive winged beings, scales like armor plating, recorded wingspans of 30 meters for the adult elders. This creature was the size of a large dog. Its scales were deep violet, almost blue in the low corridor light. Its wings were folded tight against its body, and its 4 limbs were tucked under it like a cat settled in for sleep. A thin ridge of pale spines ran from the top of its narrow skull down to the base of a tail curled around its own feet. It was shaking. Not violently, just a fine, constant tremor, the kind that comes not from cold but from fear held very still for a very long time. Darren did not speak. He did not reach out. He breathed slowly and looked at the wall above its head, giving it something to watch that was not his eyes. 3 minutes passed, maybe 4. The ventilation hum filled the silence. Then the creature moved. It uncurled one foreleg, placed it forward, and shifted its weight. Not toward the exit. Toward him. It stopped. Watched. He did not react. It moved again, closing half the distance between them, and then stopped once more, waiting to see what he would do with that information. He did nothing. It crossed the rest of the space and pressed its flank against his leg. The warmth of it hit him immediately, like resting against a hearthstone. The trembling slowed. He stayed still. It lowered its head to the floor, eyes going from wide and bright to slow and half-closed. Darren sat there for 20 minutes before he quietly reached for his comm and sent a one-line message to Dr. Faye Hollis, the station's head linguist. Need you in corridor 7. No noise. No running. Faye arrived in 4 minutes. She stopped at the corridor entrance, saw what she was looking at, and went completely white. She typed to him on her comm screen rather than speak aloud. That is a VLDRI hatchling. He typed back. I gathered. Darren, hatchlings are sacred. They do not leave the elder quarters. Ever. It was behind the vent panel. How did you get it to come to you? He looked at the creature sleeping against his leg. Its breath came in long, steady pulls. The trembling was gone. I sat down, he typed. Faye stared at her screen. Then she looked at him. Then she looked at the hatchling. She typed one more thing. Commander Yusuf is going to want to return it immediately. Tell him to wait. He won't like that. I don't care what he likes. She's asleep. There was a pause before Faye replied. He noticed she did not correct his use of she. The hatchling's tail shifted in its sleep, curling loosely over Darren's boot. Its golden eye was shut. Its breathing moved the tiny spines along its back in a slow, rhythmic rise and fall. Darren leaned his head back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. 3 days before humanity's most important diplomatic summit. The VLDRI delegation sleeping 40 meters away. Every political officer on the station running themselves ragged over seating arrangements and translation protocols and the precise angle of the human flag display. And here he was, sitting on a cold metal floor in a maintenance corridor because a frightened baby dragon had chosen his leg as the safest place in the universe. He had not offered her food. He had not spoken to her. He had not performed any of the 47 first contact protocols outlined in the Halcyon Diplomatic Handbook. He had just stopped moving. Somewhere above them, the station lights shifted from white to amber, evening cycle beginning. The corridor grew a shade dimmer and a shade warmer. The hatchling sighed in her sleep. Darren stayed exactly where he was. The alarm did not sound like an alarm. It sounded like a horn carved from bone, low and resonant, filling the entire station with a vibration that had no clean beginning and no clean end. It came from the VLDRI quarters. Darren felt it in his back teeth before he heard it with his ears. The hatchling woke up. She lifted her head fast, spines rising along her neck, golden eyes wide and scanning. Darren watched her freeze the same way she had frozen when he first saw her. Everything locked, body tight, waiting for something terrible. He put his hand flat on the floor, not touching her, just near. A shape that was warm and still and not a threat. She looked at his hand. Then she looked at the corridor entrance. Then she looked at his hand again. She lowered herself back down, not fully relaxed, but not bolting either. She pressed tighter against his leg. Faye appeared in the entrance with Commander Yusuf 2 steps behind her. Yusuf was a tall man with the particular posture of someone trying very hard not to raise his voice. He looked at Darren. He looked at the creature against Darren's leg. His jaw worked silently for a moment. The Veldari delegation is tearing the station apart, he said, keeping his voice flat and low. Elder Sara is awake and she is not calm. Counselor Breath is using the word incident in every sentence. She woke when the horn sounded, Darren said quietly. She's settling again. Darren, that is not a station cat. I'm aware. We need to return her. We will. Give her 2 minutes. Yusuf looked at Faye. Faye gave him the expression of someone who had already made peace with the situation and was simply waiting for him to catch up. Darren stood slowly, keeping one hand low, and the hatchling rose with him like she had already decided they were going to the same place. She did not walk behind him. She walked beside him, shoulder close to his knee, wings tight against her back. They walked her through the corridor into the main diplomatic hall. Elder Sara was already there. Darren had read the files. He was not prepared for the reality. Sara was ancient in the way that mountains are ancient, not decrepit, but accumulated. Her scales were the deep gold of old metal, layered and heavy. Her wingspan folded behind her filled the entire back of the room. Her eyes were the color of amber held up to firelight, and when they landed on Darren, he understood for the first time what it felt like to be genuinely assessed. Counselor Breath stood at her left. He was younger, his scales a bright copper, and he was radiating fury with the controlled precision of someone who had practiced it. You removed the hatchling from. Sara made a sound. One short, low click from the back of her throat. Breath stopped speaking immediately. The elder looked at the hatchling. The hatchling had pressed so close to Darren's knee that he could feel her warmth through his trousers. She was not cowering. She was not hiding behind him. She was simply beside him, and she was not afraid. Sara watched this for a long time. Then she spoke. The translator in Darren's earpiece rendered the words a half-second after they came. She chose to sit with you. She was frightened, Darren said. I sat down. She came over. You sat down. Sara repeated it, as if she were weighing each word separately. I didn't want to startle her. The elder turned to Breath and spoke in their own language. The translator caught pieces. Bond. Floor. Willingness. The old sign. Breath's copper scales shifted in what Faye would later describe to Darren as the Veldri equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. Sara addressed Darren again, her voice slower this time, as if accounting for the translation delay. Our hatchlings bond through stillness. Not through food. Not through strength. Through the willingness of another creature to stop and simply be present. It is the foundation of our oldest law. A hatchling who has been frightened will only approach what her body tells her is safe. She paused. The last time a hatchling chose to sit with an outsider was 4,000 years ago. It is written in our first records as the moment that ended a war. The room was very quiet. I didn't know any of that, Darren said honestly. I know, said Sara. That is precisely why it matters. Breath spoke carefully, choosing his words like someone picking a path through something unstable. Elder, the diplomatic implications of allowing this to stand. Sit down, Breath. Sara did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The hatchling made a small sound. Not distressed, something lower, almost a rumble. Sarah looked at her granddaughter, and something moved behind those amber eyes that no translator could catch. Faye leaned close to Darren and spoke at barely a breath. "What do we do?" Darren looked down at the hatchling sitting beside his knee, tail curled loosely over his foot, watching the great elder with calm golden eyes. "Nothing," he said quietly. "We don't do anything. That seems to be the whole point." The planet came into view slowly, the way important things often do. First a suggestion of color at the edge of the viewport, then shape, then detail, and then something that hit Darren somewhere below the ribs and made him put his hand against the cold glass. Vethra was not green. It was not blue. It was the color of deep amber and pale silver. Vast canyon systems carved into warm stone, forests that caught the starlight and threw it back in pieces because every tree was made of something crystalline, something that grew like biology but shone like mineral. Rivers of luminous water wound through the canyon floors. Clouds sat low over the mountain ridges and moved slowly, heavy with whatever weather Vethra called its own. Nobody had ever stood on this planet who was not Veldri. Until today, Darren was the only human on the transport. Beside him, Rin sat with her 4 feet on the viewport ledge, watching the planet below with the particular attention of something returning to a smell it had almost forgotten. The hatchling had grown slightly in the past 2 weeks. The top of her head now reached his chest when she stood straight. She was still small by every Veldri scale. She had not left his side since the corridor. Elder Sarah had insisted he come. Admiral Osei had spent 40 minutes arguing against it, then 30 minutes accepting it, then 10 minutes telling Darren very firmly that he represented all of humanity and should try to behave accordingly. He had told her he would do his best. She had looked at him the way people look when they are not entirely confident in your best. The transport landed in a canyon city the Veldri called Sorveth, the first hollow. The name, Faye had explained on the journey, meant something closer to the place where the world first learned to be quiet. Darren stepped out onto stone that was warm underfoot even through his boots. He looked up. The canyon walls stretched so high they caught a different quality of light at the top than at the base. Cut into the stone on every level were structures, dwellings, halls, open platforms, and on every platform and ledge and wide stone surface, there were Veldri. Hundreds of them, perhaps more, all watching the canyon floor in silence. Watching him. Their scales were every color he had not yet imagined. Pale green, deep blue, bright amber, a white so clean it looked carved. Their wings were folded. Their eyes were fixed on the single human standing at the base of their oldest city. He became very aware of how small he was. Rin pressed against his leg. He put his hand on the top of her head without thinking. She rumbled. That low, steady sound he had learned meant something like settled. The crowd on the canyon walls made a sound back. Low, collective. He felt it more than heard it. Faye, beside him, grabbed his arm. They responded to her, she whispered. They responded to Rin responding to you. The naming ceremony was held in the great open circle at the center of the city, a flat floor of stone polished smooth by what must have been centuries of use. The Veldri gathered around its edge, tier on the canyon walls, and Elder Sarah stood at the circle's center with the stillness of something that had stood in that spot many times before. Darren was asked to enter the circle alone and sit. Just sit, on the stone floor, in the middle of the oldest gathering place on Vethra. He sat. Rin, from outside the circle's edge, made a small sharp sound. Like a question. He looked at her. She looked back. He gave her one small nod, though he had no real idea why. Then she flew. It was the first time he had seen her fly. Her wings were pale gold underneath, lit from below by the warm mineral glow of the canyon floor, and she was not graceful yet. She was young, and flight was still new. But she rose in a wide circle above the center of the plaza, above him, turning slowly in the warm updraft of the canyon. The crowd hummed, a deep, resonant sound that came from thousands of chests and filled the canyon from floor to cloud. Sarah spoke. In our oldest tongue, a name given in this circle is not a title. It is an observation, something true, witnessed, and agreed upon. She looked at Darren. The name we give you is Rethan Sova. The translator offered it quietly in his ear, the one who waits without wanting. He didn't speak. He was not sure he could have. Sarah continued. In 4,000 years, no outsider has received this name. The circle has not been opened for a naming of this kind in living memory. She looked up at Rin, still circling above them. We do not give it because of what you did. We give it because of what you did not do. You did not reach. You did not take. You did not perform. You simply stopped. And in stopping, you became the safest thing in her world. Rin landed beside him on the stone. Her wing folded over his shoulder like something settling into a long-held habit. Above them, the canyon rang with the sound of thousands of Veldri, quiet and vast, and old as the stone itself. Darren sat very still. He was getting good at that. It started with a message that was not sent to Darren. He only learned about it later, from Faye, who had found it buried in a communication thread that technically should not have existed on the station's shared relay. Someone had been sloppy, or perhaps someone had wanted it found eventually. Faye could never fully decide which. The message had gone from Breath's personal terminal to a Veldri contact flagged in the diplomatic registry as a cultural observer. In translation, it said, the human was positioned deliberately. The bond is being used as a political instrument by the human command structure. The hatchling is not safe. 12 words that could pull apart everything built in 3 weeks. Darren was back on Halcyon when Faye brought it to him. He read it twice, put it down, and sat looking at the wall for a long moment. How wide did this go, he asked. Wide enough. Faye sat across from him. She looked tired in the specific way of someone who had been angry for hours and had run out of the energy to keep showing it. There's a faction on Vethra, older families, conservative, never wanted the summit to happen at all. Breath has been in contact with them since before we arrived. This message gave them what they needed. The summit was 8 days away. Darren had been scheduled to return to Vethra as part of the diplomatic support team. That schedule had now been suspended pending review. The review was being run by Admiral Nadine Osei. She called him in at noon, station time. Her office was the kind of orderly that came from discipline rather than preference. Everything placed with purpose, nothing decorative. She sat behind her desk and studied him the way she studied every problem, without hurry and without softness. I need to ask you directly, she said. Was any part of your interaction with the hatchling guided by instruction? From me. From anyone in command. From anyone at all. No, Darren said. Did you know what a hatchling bond signified before it happened? No. I thought she was frightened and small. I sat down. Osei was quiet. I believe you, she said. The problem is that belief is not evidence. And right now Breath's faction is presenting this as a coordinated human intelligence operation designed to manipulate a sacred Veldri institution. She folded her hands on the desk. Darren, do you understand what that accusation means, politically? It means they can void the summit. It means they can void the summit, recall their entire delegation, and go home with a grievance that will take 20 years to undo. She looked at him steadily. So I need you to tell me if there is anything at all, that could be read as deliberate on your part. Darren thought about the maintenance corridor, the cold floor, the panel 7 sensor that still, as far as he knew, was reading incorrectly, the eye in the dark watching him, and the part of his brain that said go still. I sat on the floor, he said. I didn't move. She came to me. Osei looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. But Rin was on Vethra, and Darren was here. Faye reported it to him that evening, quietly, unhappily, like someone delivering a diagnosis. The hatchling had stopped eating. Not dramatically, not with any outward display of distress. She had simply stopped going to the feeding area. She had curled herself into a tight coil in the corner of Elder Sara's chambers, facing the wall, and she would not uncurl for anyone. She had not flown since he left. Sara had sent a formal communication to the station that was technically neutral in language and carried the weight of a warning in every line. Veldri hatchlings who formed a bond and then experienced abrupt separation sometimes did not recover. This was not a threat. This was a documented biological reality. Breath, when informed of Rin's condition, had said it was further evidence of the danger of allowing the bond to continue. If the hatchling was already this dependent on a human, the influence was clearly too deep. Commander Yusuf brought Darren this update personally, which told him it was worse than the words made it sound. What do they want? Darren asked. Breath's faction wants you formally removed from any association with the Veldri delegation. Declared a security complication. Reassigned. And Sara. Yusuf paused. Sarah has not spoken publicly since she sent the communication, but her aide passed word to our cultural liaison. He glanced at his notes as if he needed them, though Darren suspected he had memorized every word. She said, "The circle does not lie, but liars may speak in circles. She will wait for the hatchling to give the answer." Darren looked out the viewport at the stars. Rin was curled against a wall 40 light minutes away, not eating, not flying, not making that low rumbling sound that meant settled. Because he was not there. Because something had put distance between her and the one thing her body had decided was safe. And no amount of politics or protocol was going to explain that to a creature whose understanding of the world ran deeper than language. He thought about breath and felt something cool and clear, not anger exactly, but the specific resolve that comes when a person decides to stop being patient with a process and start being useful. "Tell Sarah I want to address the council," he said. Yusuf looked at him. "That's not in any protocol." "No," Darren agreed. "It isn't." The council chamber on Vethra was cut from the canyon's oldest stone. There were no seats designed for human bodies. The Veldri used broad flat ledges carved at different heights, tiered in a half circle around a central floor. 43 council members. Wings folded, eyes forward. The chamber smelled of warm mineral and something older, something Darren had no name for. Breath stood at the front when Darren entered. He had clearly expected this to be his moment. A formal presentation, evidence laid out, the human removed quietly from the picture before the summit could be further complicated. He had prepared. His copper scales were bright, his posture composed. Then Darren walked in, and the first thing the chamber saw was that Rin was not with him. Breath began. His presentation was precise and fluent. Darren followed the translation through his earpiece. The human xenobiologist had arrived at Station Halcyon as part of a coordinated diplomatic strategy. His positioning near the hatchling quarters was not accidental. The bond had been cultivated deliberately to manufacture a point of leverage over Veldri's sacred tradition. The station log showed Darren had been in the restricted corridor at an unusual hour. The timing of his discovery of the hatchling was suspiciously close to the summit. This was, Breath concluded, a manipulation of the highest order. The council listened. Several members shifted on their ledges. One very old male near the back had his eyes half closed, which Faye, standing at the chamber's edge, had once told Darren meant deep listening, not boredom. When Breath finished, Sarah looked at Darren. "You may speak," she said. He walked forward to the center of the floor. He stood there for a moment, in front of 43 Veldri council members and one ancient elder, in a chamber that had seen 4,000 years of decisions, and he thought about what Admiral Osei had told him before he transported back to Vethra. "Say what is true and nothing more, because they will know if you perform." He did not speak. Not yet. He turned to Sarah. "May I approach Rin?" There was movement in the chamber. Breath made a short, sharp sound. Sarah raised one long foreleg slightly, a gesture Darren had learned meant wait, and looked toward the side door where Sarah's aide stood. The aide stepped aside. Rin came through the door slowly, the way sick things move, not dramatically, but without their usual sureness. Her scales had gone a shade duller than violet. Her wings dragged. Her golden eyes were open, but not sharp. She stopped in the chamber entrance and looked at the assembled council. Her spines rose slightly. 43 large, unfamiliar Veldri watching her from every direction. Darren sat down on the stone floor. No chair, no platform, just the cold, smooth floor of the oldest chamber on Vethra, legs crossed, hands on his knees, the way he had sat in a maintenance corridor 11 months into a posting nobody thought mattered. Rin looked at him. He looked at the floor just past her feet. Not at her, not demanding her attention, just occupying the space, warm and still and not a threat. 10 seconds. 20. She walked across the chamber floor and climbed into his lap. Not carefully, not with any dignity. She simply folded herself into the available space the way young creatures do, all joints and angles, too big for it already but committed to the attempt. She tucked her head under his chin. Her tail came around and rested across his boot. The chamber was absolutely silent. Darren looked up at the council. He spoke quietly. The translator carried it. One of the elder council members made a low sound. Not a challenge. Something reflective. I did not know what Rin was, Darren continued. I did not know what her choosing to sit with me meant. I sat on a cold metal floor because she was shaking and small and alone, and I remembered what my mother told me. He looked at Breath. There was no strategy. There was no coordination. There was a frightened creature and a human who knew how to stop moving. Breath opened his mouth. Faye stepped forward from the chamber edge. She had a data screen and placed it before the council recorder without any dramatics. The maintenance log from Corridor 7 shows Darren's work order, filed 6 hours before Rin was found. The thermal sensor at panel 7 has been faulty for 3 weeks. I have the repair record. She stepped back. The old male near the back opened his eyes fully. Sarah looked at Breath for a long, quiet moment. Then she addressed him in Veldri, and the translator gave Darren only pieces. Enough. Known. Unfounded. Removed. Breath left the chamber without a further word. Rin had not lifted her head through any of it. She was asleep in Darren's lap, breathing in the long, slow rhythm of something completely at rest. Sarah looked at them both for a moment, and the expression on her ancient face was one that needed no translation at all. The circle, she said softly, does not lie. The treaty was signed on a Thursday. Not that the Veldri had Thursdays. They measured time by the long tidal pull of Vethore's twin moons and marked important moments by the position of mineral rivers at dawn. But in the human log, the date was a Thursday, and the officer who recorded it added a personal note below the official entry. First contact treaty between humanity and the Veldri people, signed without a single shot fired, without a single threat made, without a single act of force. Below that, in smaller text, the same officer wrote, "We sent a xenobiologist." The treaty had an unusual clause buried in its third section. Most treaties between species dealt in territories and trade and passage rights. This one did all of that, and then it contained a provision the Veldri called Rethan Sova Law, the Stillkin Clause. Any non-Veldri individual who received a hatchling bond through witnessed, unforced stillness would be recognized under Veldri law as kin of spirit. They would have the right to walk freely on Vethare, to attend the naming circle, to be addressed by their Veldri name. There was only one name in that clause when the treaty was signed. Darren Cole, Rethan Sova, the one who waits without wanting. He went back to his lab. That was the part nobody wrote about in the news reports that circulated through human channels for the next several months. The feeds had images of the signing ceremony, Admiral Osei and Elder Sarah, formal and still, pressing the seals to the document. And they had dramatic reconstructions of the naming circle with light and canyon imagery. And there were 3 separate long-form articles about the cultural significance of hatchling bonding among the Veldri. Darren was mentioned in all of them. He was described as a xenobiologist. One article called him a quiet hero, which he read once, and then set down and did not read again. He went back to his lab. He filed the rest of his biology reports. He fixed the panel 7 sensor, which was still reading incorrectly. He ate rehydrated meals at his desk and wrote field notes and answered the 47 official correspondence messages that had accumulated during the summit period, most of which he answered in 3 sentences or fewer. Rin arrived on the station 2 weeks after the treaty signing. She was bigger. Hatchlings grew fast in the first year. The files had said this, and the files were correct. She was now roughly the size of a large horse. Her violet scales deepened to something approaching indigo at the edges. Her gold spines lengthened and sharpened. She moved through the station corridors in a way that made station personnel press themselves to the walls, not out of fear exactly, but out of the specific instinct of people who are sharing a hallway with something that is very clearly not designed for hallways. She found Darren in his lab. She always found Darren in his lab. She came in, looked at him sitting at his desk, and folded herself onto the floor beside his chair with a sound like a large piece of furniture being rearranged. Her head came to rest on the floor. Her eyes went half closed. Her tail found his boot in the way it always did, by habit, by preference, by whatever deep internal logic guided her toward the thing that meant settled. He kept writing. Faye came by that evening and stood in the lab doorway for a moment, looking at the two of them, the man at his desk, the indigo dragon on the floor beside him, the quiet of the room. She was writing a paper on Veldri bonding behavior, and she had more material than she had expected. She traveled 40 light minutes to come and lie on your floor. Faye said. She's comfortable here, Darren said, not looking up. You understand that every xenobiologist in the human sphere would trade anything to be where you are right now. I have a sensor calibration report due tomorrow, he said. Do you need something? Faye looked at Rin, who had opened one golden eye to look at her, and then closed it again. She looked at Darren. She thought about saying something meaningful and then decided it would land badly. No, she said. Good night. The months passed. Rin grew. The station adapted. A wider doorway was cut between two sections of corridor because a Veldari the size of a draft horse navigating a standard passage caused structural vibration complaints. Nobody officially noted who the passage was for. Everyone knew. Rin used it without acknowledgement, the way she used everything Darren's world offered her, as simply the environment in which she and he existed. Admiral Osei wrote her end-of-year report and included a section she had not planned to include when she started writing it. She described the summit, the treaty, the clause, the naming. Then she wrote, "The alien species we feared most was not won over by our ships, or our weapons, or our words. They were reached by a scientist who knew when to stop moving. I do not think we teach that as a strategy. I think it may be the most human thing we do." The report went into the official record. Historians would quote it later. At the time, it was just a paragraph in a long document that most people never read to the end. Darren did not read it at all. He was in his lab. Evening cycle. Amber light. The field notes he had been writing for 11 months had become something larger. A formal study on Veldari hatchling behavior that Faye said would change the field. He was on the third revision of the introduction, which was still not quite right. Rin's enormous indigo head was on the floor beside his chair. Her breath moved slow and deep in the rhythm of something completely at rest. Her tail was across his boot. Outside the station, the stars were very old and very far and entirely indifferent to treaties and theses and history. Inside the lab, a man sat at his desk and a dragon slept beside him. Neither of them asked for anything more than that. Some needs are older than language, older than species, older than any sky any creature has ever looked up at and wondered about. The need to not be alone in the dark. The need to find, in a universe that is mostly cold and mostly empty, one warm and quiet place to rest. Rin had found hers. So quietly had he.